This story is titled, My Girlfriend Had Too Many Complaints About Our Bedroom Activities, but What I Did Completely Changed Her Attitude. Hey Reddit, my name is Derek, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd be sharing my life story on here, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe it'll help someone else recognize the red flags I completely missed along the way. Fair warning, this is going to be a long read, but I think it's worth it if you've ever felt trapped in a relationship that slowly suffocated who you are. Most people think construction work is just about lifting heavy materials and getting your hands dirty every day. What they don't realize is how much this industry actually teaches you about building foundations that are meant to last. I'm Derek, and I work as an electrical contractor and project supervisor at Brightline Construction, where I've been for over 10 years now. The job pays pretty well and comes with decent benefits. Nothing crazy luxurious, but enough to afford the house my wife Victoria insisted we absolutely needed. We ended up with a $375,000 house in Clearwater Ridge specifically because, as she put it, the school district is amazing for when we have kids. At the time, it seemed like a reasonable investment in our future together. I first met Victoria 9 years ago at my buddy Marcus's wedding. She was working as a dental hygienist back then, making decent money and seemingly independent. But 4 years into our marriage, she decided to quit her job. Her explanation was that dealing with disgusting mouths all day was giving her severe anxiety, and she just couldn't handle it anymore. I supported her decision completely. That's what husbands are supposed to do, right? Support their wives through difficult times. After leaving her job, Victoria talked constantly about starting an Etsy business selling custom jewelry. She had all these elaborate plans and seemed genuinely excited about becoming an entrepreneur. However, instead of working on her business, she mostly spent her time hanging out with her friends Crystal, Brittany, and Madison, her self-proclaimed girl squad, who seemed to consume more and more of her attention as time went on. That manila envelope hit our kitchen table with a soft thud on a Tuesday night in September. I had just finished a grueling 13-hour day managing a strip mall development project, and my muscles were aching while my clothes were still covered in dust from the job site. All I could think about was taking a hot shower and getting some much-needed sleep. I definitely wasn't prepared for whatever power play was about to unfold in my own kitchen. Victoria stood there wearing her $190 athleisure outfit that had clearly never seen an actual workout. Her arms were crossed, and she had this weird, unsettling smirk on her face that immediately made my stomach tighten with dread. Her highlighted blonde hair was perfectly styled, even though she'd claimed to be too exhausted to cook dinner again that evening. I couldn't help but notice the new Coach watch gleaming on her wrist. That definitely wasn't a gift from me, and I had no idea where it had come from. 12 demands, she announced, tapping the manila envelope with her French-tipped nails that probably cost more than my work boots. Meet every single one of these requirements, or you can forget about sex permanently. I stared at her, genuinely confused about whether this was some kind of bizarre joke or if she was actually serious. We'd been married for 8 years, and while things had definitely been tense between us lately, this seemed like next-level insanity that came completely out of nowhere. This isn't up for negotiation, she stated firmly when I reached toward the envelope to examine its contents. These are requirements for our marriage moving forward. Take it or leave it. Inside the envelope were 3 pages that had been professionally printed and stapled together with obvious care. Each demand was numbered, bolded, and explained in meticulous detail that told me she'd spent significant time crafting this document. As I read through the contents, my blood actually ran cold. This wasn't about improving our marriage or addressing legitimate concerns. This was about complete ownership and control. Where the hell did this come from? I asked, keeping my voice as level as possible despite my hands wanting to shake from a mixture of anger and disbelief. I've been talking with the girls, she replied casually, examining her manicure like we were discussing something as mundane as the weather forecast. Women like me don't have to put up with average anymore. It's time for you to step up or get replaced. The casual cruelty in her voice hit me harder than the actual written demands themselves. This wasn't my wife trying to fix something that was broken between us. This was someone who was genuinely enjoying the power she thought she had over me. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning while the demands kept repeating in my head like a broken record. Meanwhile, Victoria snored softly beside me, probably dreaming about how she'd finally fixed our marriage to her satisfaction. Let me share some of the specific demands that were in that envelope, because they'll give you a clear picture of just how controlling and manipulative this document really was. Demand number 2 stated that I would be required to deposit 85% of my paychecks directly into her personal account for management purposes. In return, I would receive a monthly allowance of $300 for all my personal expenses. Think about that for a moment. I would essentially become a tenant in my own life, asking permission to spend the money I earned through hard physical labor. Demand number 4 required that I verbally request permission for sex at least 36 hours in advance. These requests could be denied without any explanation whatsoever, giving her complete control over our intimacy. The clinical, business-like tone of this demand made it clear she viewed our marriage as a transaction rather than a partnership. Demand number 5 mandated that I complete a monthly performance review, where she would evaluate my husband duties with a numerical scoring system. I couldn't help but imagine sitting across from my own wife like some kind of employee being graded on my domestic performance. Demand number 6 specified that weekly gifts with a minimum value of $75 were required regardless of our financial situation. This meant that even if we were struggling to pay bills, I'd still be obligated to find money for presents to keep her satisfied. Demand number 8 was particularly disturbing. It stated that her friends' opinions about my behavior would be considered equal to hers in these evaluations. Essentially, Crystal, Brittany, and Madison would have voting rights in my marriage, able to influence how my wife judged my worth as a husband. Demand number 9 gave her the right to record our intimate moments without informing me when these recordings were happening. The legal and personal violations inherent in this demand were staggering, but she'd written it down like it was perfectly reasonable. Demand number 11 made weekly attendance at couples counseling with Dr. Michelle, who happened to be her friend from college, mandatory. Not a neutral therapist we chose together, but someone from her personal circle who would obviously be biased in her favor. Finally, demand number 12 outlined correction periods, where additional household duties would be assigned if I failed to meet her standards. Basically, punishment details for not being a good enough servant in my own home. As I lay there staring at the ceiling that night, I couldn't help but think about how we'd gotten to this point. When we first got married, Victoria used to bring me coffee in bed sometimes, just because she wanted to do something nice. She'd text me during the day just to say she was thinking about me. Little gestures that made me feel valued and loved. Somewhere along the line, that woman had completely disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Looking back, I realized this hadn't happened overnight. The warning signs had been building for years, but I'd been making excuses and rationalizing her behavior instead of acknowledging what was really happening. 3 years ago, Victoria convinced me to sell my 1971 Camaro SS, a car I'd spent 3 years restoring with my dad before he died of cancer. It was one of the most meaningful possessions I owned, filled with memories of working alongside my father and learning skills that had shaped who I became. But Victoria insisted we needed the space in the garage for her craft supplies for the Etsy business that never materialized. "We need the space in the garage for my craft supplies," she'd said, making it sound like a reasonable request for our shared future. I got $31,000 for that car, money that somehow managed to get spent on her sister's destination wedding in Cancun, and a small business investment that mysteriously never came to fruition. Every penny disappeared without improving our lives in any meaningful way. 4 months later, my Tuesday poker nights with the guys from work went from weekly to monthly, then stopped altogether when she started scheduling what she called surprise date nights. These special evenings always just ended up being her watching Netflix while I cooked dinner after working 12-hour days. The spontaneous romance she promised turned into more work for me and entertainment for her. Last year, she convinced me to move 45 minutes away from my mom and brother, claiming the new neighborhood would be better for kids we hadn't even had yet. The distance meant I saw my family much less frequently, which I later realized was exactly what she wanted. What I discovered afterward was that her entire girl squad lived within 5 minutes of our new house. The move wasn't about our future children. It was about positioning herself closer to her support network while isolating me from mine. Each time I gave in to one of her requests, she just got bolder with the next one. What had started as subtle manipulation and reasonable-sounding suggestions had gradually escalated into this contract that was trying to officially make me her personal piggy bank and live-in servant. The progression had been so gradual that I hadn't seen the bigger picture until she laid it all out in black and white. I got out of bed at 4:30 a.m., being careful not to wake her, and made coffee in the quiet darkness of our kitchen. Standing at the window watching the sunrise, I came to a sobering realization. I wasn't even surprised by these demands anymore. I was just disappointed in myself for not seeing this coming and for allowing things to progress this far. I sat in my Silverado in the office parking lot for almost 30 minutes that morning, staring at that stupid manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat like some kind of toxic time bomb. Finally, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. First, I called to check our account balances to understand exactly what financial resources we had. Then, I called a lawyer named Jonathan Pierce, who my foreman had used for his divorce the previous year. "I can see you at 4:30, Jonathan said when I explained my situation briefly over the phone. "Bring any documentation of concerning behavior that you might have." At work that day, I went through the motions of my job on complete autopilot. I checked materials deliveries, solved problems with subcontractors, and managed the crew. But my mind was working on something else entirely, developing an exit strategy that would protect me from whatever Victoria was planning. Jonathan's office was located in a converted Victorian house downtown. Nothing fancy or intimidating, but definitely professional in its presentation. He appeared to be around 52 years old with short gray hair and the confident demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible type of marital disaster over the years. I slid the manila envelope across his desk without saying a word, letting the documents speak for themselves. His eyebrows raised slightly as he read through the demands, and then he looked up at me with something that resembled genuine respect. This wasn't the reaction of someone who was shocked or surprised. This was a professional who recognized exactly what he was looking at. "This is unusually explicit evidence of emotional abuse," he said, setting the papers down carefully. "How long has this type of behavior been going on in your marriage?" That question forced me to really examine our entire relationship with fresh eyes. The warning signs had been there from the very beginning, but I'd consistently ignored them and made excuses for her behavior instead of acknowledging what was really happening. I told him about how she'd maxed out 2 credit cards in my name last year, $16,000 worth of charges on clothes, and a spa trip with her friends. When I'd confronted her about the unauthorized spending, she'd cried and claimed she felt financially trapped, despite the fact that she was spending far more of my money than I was. Jonathan nodded knowingly while taking detailed notes. "What else can you tell me about her financial behavior?" I explained how she'd convinced me to put the house in both our names, even though I'd paid the entire $78,000 down payment from an inheritance I'd received when my dad died. She hadn't contributed a single dollar toward the mortgage payments in over 2 years, but legally she now owned half of the property. I told him about the life insurance policy that Victoria had convinced me to cancel because it was too expensive, but which I'd later discovered had been reactivated with her as the sole beneficiary instead of my family members. The isolation tactics became clearer as I explained them to someone else. She'd systematically separated me from friends and family members, always with reasonable-sounding explanations that I'd accepted at the time. Most disturbing was discovering birth control pills hidden in her drawer, even though she'd been telling me for months that she wanted to start trying for a baby and couldn't understand why we weren't getting pregnant. "I need everything documented properly," I told the lawyer with growing determination, "and I need to know how to protect myself financially and legally without tipping my hand yet." "You're already ahead of most clients who come to see me," Jonathan replied approvingly. "Most people don't contact me until after their spouse has already emptied the bank accounts and destroyed their credit. Let's develop a complete strategy to safeguard your interests." As I drove home from the lawyer's office, I realized something incredibly important about what had just happened. Those 12 demands weren't simply a list of rules that Victoria wanted me to follow. They were essentially a declaration of war against my self-respect and dignity as a human being. What she didn't realize was that she'd just provoked a response from someone who was far more capable of strategic thinking than she'd given me credit for. That evening, when I arrived home, Victoria was sitting on the couch scrolling through Instagram, completely ignoring my presence as if I were invisible. Our house suddenly felt like hostile territory, a place where I was no longer welcome except in the capacity of a servant who existed solely to fund her lifestyle and cater to her whims. "Have you thought about my requirements?" she asked without bothering to look up from her phone screen, her tone casual and dismissive. "I'm working through it," I replied, watching her reaction carefully to see how she'd respond to my non-committal answer. Her eyes narrowed with obvious displeasure at my response. "Don't take too long to make your decision," she said with a threatening edge to her voice. "Crystal's husband's friend Brandon just got divorced recently. He makes 6 figures and owns a boat, and she thinks we'd hit it off really well." The threat was unmistakably obvious, but I just nodded calmly and went to take a shower. Once I was alone in the bathroom, I finally allowed myself to feel the full force of the rage that had been building inside me. This wasn't blind, destructive anger. This was controlled fury that would fuel whatever needed to be done to protect myself and my future. Later that night, while Victoria slept peacefully beside me, I did something I'd never done before in our entire marriage. Her phone was charging on her nightstand, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. The passcode was her birthday, 3/1, which was typical behavior for someone with narcissistic tendencies who assumes the world revolves around them. What I discovered when I accessed her phone confirmed every suspicion I'd had and revealed the true scope of what I was dealing with. There was a group chat called Husband Trainers that included Crystal, Brittany, and Madison. This chat revealed the shocking truth about those demands. They weren't just Victoria's twisted idea. They were the result of a collaborative effort between all four women. The messages I found were absolutely chilling in their casual cruelty. Victoria had written, "Derek's list is done. 12 items just like we discussed. Going to drop the bomb tonight." Crystal had responded, "Yes, girl, put that workman in his place." Madison had added, "The financial control is key. Once you have his balls in his wallet, victory is complete." Brittany had contributed, "The recording idea was genius. Nothing keeps them in line like knowing you have dirt on them." These women were discussing their husbands and boyfriends like disobedient pets that needed to be broken and trained into submission. They were sharing manipulation tactics and comparing notes on the most effective ways to psychologically control the men in their lives. Crystal had written about how recording for leverage was perfect in case Derek grows a spine and tries leaving. And Victoria had confidently replied that she wasn't worried because Derek was too passive to fight back and would fold like they always do. I carefully took screenshots of the most damaging conversations and emailed them to myself from her phone. Then I meticulously deleted the sent email from her account and restored her phone to exactly the same position and settings as I'd found it. My stomach was in knots from what I'd discovered, but my mind was crystal clear about what needed to happen next. This wasn't just about saving my dignity anymore. This was about escaping from a predator and her entire pack of enablers. In the darkness of our bedroom, I looked at the woman sleeping peacefully beside me and realized with startling clarity that I'd been married to a complete stranger all along. Or perhaps more accurately, I'd simply never wanted to see who she really was beneath the mask she'd been wearing. For the next week, I executed my escape plan with military precision. During the day, I pretended to be a man who was slowly resigning himself to his wife's unreasonable demands. At night, however, I was systematically advancing my exit strategy with methodical thoroughness that would have impressed my project management colleagues. I opened a new bank account at a completely different financial institution and transferred exactly 50% of our joint savings, $26,340. Not a penny more despite the temptation to take everything. I wanted to be completely fair and legal in my approach, giving her no ammunition to use against me later. I secured a 2-bedroom apartment in West Shore, about 20 minutes from my workplace, for $450 per month with a month-to-month lease agreement. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had a small balcony overlooking the bay that felt like freedom. "Just need a quiet place to catch up on blueprints and project planning," I told the property manager when she asked about my needs, paying 3 months in advance to secure the lease immediately. I spent considerable time carefully documenting all of our possessions, taking detailed photos, and creating a comprehensive inventory of what belonged to me before our marriage versus what we'd acquired together as a couple. My grandfather's tools, my fishing gear, and family photos were items that held sentimental value and legal ownership. I gradually relocated these possessions to a storage unit I'd rented, making trips during lunch breaks or when I had to work late, ensuring nothing was obvious enough to tip Victoria off to what I was planning. I contacted a realtor to get a professional assessment of our house's current market value. "Looking at maybe $425,000 in this market," she told me, after reviewing the property details. "Not bad for 3 years of ownership, especially considering the neighborhood improvements." I arranged for all my important mail to be forwarded to a P.O. box I'd rented under my name only. I meticulously checked my credit report to ensure Victoria hadn't opened any new accounts or credit lines in my name without my knowledge. I changed passwords on all my important financial and personal accounts, and created a new email address that she had no knowledge of for secure communications. Each step of this process was carefully calculated and completely invisible to Victoria. I was essentially operating like a ghost in my own marriage, preparing for an exit that she couldn't see coming. The hardest part of this entire process was maintaining the facade of being a confused, conflicted husband who was slowly coming around to accepting his wife's demands. Each evening when I came home from work, Victoria would look at me with obvious expectation, waiting for my inevitable surrender to her will. Sometimes she'd leave that manila envelope prominently displayed on the kitchen counter like some kind of trophy. Other times, she'd take phone calls from her friends right in front of me, discussing their training regimens in thinly veiled terms that were clearly meant for my benefit. "You're taking quite a while to think about this," she remarked one evening, sliding next to me on the couch wearing lingerie that probably cost $220. Most men would be grateful for the chance I'm giving you to improve yourself. Most men aren't me, I replied simply, maintaining my calm exterior while internally planning her downfall. She frowned momentarily at my response before forcing a laugh that sounded completely artificial. That's exactly why I picked you. You're trainable, she said, apparently thinking this was some kind of compliment. I took her comment as confirmation that I was absolutely doing the right thing by planning my escape from this psychological prison she'd constructed. That night, I made a calendar entry on my phone with a simple title, Liberation Day, Saturday. It was just 5 days away, and everything would finally come to an end. 10 days after receiving her written demands, I was ready to make my first significant countermove. Victoria had sent me a text message earlier that day asking when I was going to man up and accept reality. Instead of answering her question directly, I suggested that we have dinner at Romano's, which was the most expensive restaurant in our area, for Saturday night. Does this mean you finally accepted my terms? She texted back immediately, clearly excited by what she perceived as my capitulation. It means I'm ready to discuss our future, I replied, keeping my response deliberately vague, but promising enough to maintain her interest. She took the bait completely, just as I'd expected she would. That evening, while we were getting ready for bed, Victoria was practically gloating about her perceived victory. She told me how impressed her friends would be that I'd come to my senses so quickly compared to their own experiences. Most of their husbands took weeks of cold shoulders and emotional manipulation before they finally broke, she said, while applying some ridiculously expensive $95 face cream. I knew you were smarter than that and would see reason faster. I had chosen Romano's very carefully for our final confrontation. It was public enough to prevent her from making a scene, private enough to allow for discretion during our conversation, and expensive enough to signal the significance of what was about to happen. The reservation was scheduled for 8 p.m. on Saturday, which would give me plenty of time for my final preparations. By Friday evening, everything was perfectly in place. My essential possessions were secure in storage, my financial preparations were complete, and the legal groundwork had been laid with Jonathan's help. I'd informed my boss and several trusted co-workers about the situation in case Victoria tried to cause problems at my workplace after everything went down. On Saturday morning, Victoria went out for brunch with her girl squad, returning home with a $320 haircut and a brand new outfit specifically for our dinner that evening. Of course, all of this was charged to my credit card without any discussion or consideration. I need to look good for our new beginning, she said, with a confident wink as she admired herself in the mirror. Maybe we can start implementing demand number 4 tonight if you behave properly at dinner. I simply nodded and watched her elaborate preparations with detached fascination, like observing an exotic but dangerous animal in its natural habitat. Victoria spent hours getting ready for what she clearly viewed as her coronation ceremony. I watched her apply layers of expensive makeup, carefully choose the perfect jewelry, and select a dress that would showcase her anticipated victory. Throughout this entire process, she made numerous comments about how this dinner would mark the first day of our improved marriage under her new management system. As we drove to Romano's, she placed her hand on my thigh in a gesture of false intimacy, something she hadn't done in months unless she wanted money for something specific. I knew you'd make the right choice, she said with supreme confidence. You're much smarter than Brittany's husband. He actually tried to argue with her demands and ended up sleeping in the garage for a week before he finally gave in and accepted reality. I nodded calmly while keeping my eyes on the road, my mind focused entirely on what was about to happen. This was truly the end of the biggest mistake of my adult life. Romano's was absolutely perfect for what I had planned. We were seated at a corner table in the back section of the restaurant, with soft lighting and minimal server interaction that would provide the privacy we needed. I had arranged for a bottle of sparkling water and some luxury appetizers to be waiting at our table, which Victoria immediately mistook for submission rather than what it really was: funeral arrangements for our marriage. As we sat down, Victoria leaned forward with her eyes gleaming with triumphant satisfaction. I almost gave up on you for a while there, she said, raising her glass in a mock toast. To your improvement and our new arrangement moving forward. I clinked glasses with her but deliberately didn't drink from mine. Before we toast to anything, we should be completely clear about what we're celebrating, I said calmly. Your acceptance of the new reality. Obviously, she replied, confidence practically oozing from every syllable. I've already told the girls they can expect all the details tomorrow at brunch. I'm sure they're very eager to hear how this turned out, I said, placing a leather portfolio on the table directly between us. But first, I have a counter-proposal for you to consider. Her smile faltered slightly at my unexpected words. Counterproposal? That wasn't one of the options I gave you. It is now, I replied firmly, sliding the portfolio toward her across the table. Open it. Inside the portfolio were 4 carefully organized documents that would completely destroy the narrative Victoria had constructed about our relationship. The first document was a copy of her original 12 demands, but this version had each demand annotated with the relevant laws it violated. Coercion, financial abuse, invasion of privacy, and sexual harassment were all clearly identified with specific legal citations that Jonathan had helped me research. The second document consisted of printed screenshots from her husband trainers group chat, showing in explicit detail how she and her friends had conspired to manipulate and control their partners. The conversations about using recordings for blackmail purposes were particularly damning and potentially criminal. The third document was a complete accounting of all the money Victoria had spent from our joint accounts on personal luxuries over the past year. The total came to $51,180. Money that had been spent on designer clothes, spa treatments, expensive dinners with friends, and various other indulgences while she contributed nothing to our household expenses. The fourth and final document was a completed divorce petition, waiting only for my signature to be filed with the court. The color drained from Victoria's face as she flipped through the portfolio, her confident expression transforming into one of shock and growing panic. "You went through my phone? How dare you?" she demanded, her voice rising dangerously in the quiet restaurant. "Let's not pretend you have any kind of moral high ground here," I interrupted calmly, keeping my voice low and controlled. "Not after planning to blackmail your own husband with illegal recordings." Her eyes darted around the restaurant as she tried to calculate her next move, probably wondering if she could create enough of a scene to somehow regain control of the situation. "This is completely ridiculous," she said, attempting to regain her composure. "We can work this out. I was just trying to save our marriage." "The time for manipulation and lies is over," I cut her off firmly. "I've already transferred exactly half of our liquid assets to separate accounts as of this afternoon. The house is being listed for sale on Monday morning, and I moved out while you were getting your hair done today." Victoria stared at me with genuine shock, perhaps for the first time in our entire marriage seeing me as someone other than the compliant husband she'd spent years conditioning to accept her behavior. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, dropping her fake concerned wife act entirely. "I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone what kind of man you really are." "Tell them what exactly?" I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact while keeping my voice low but firm. "That your attempt to extort and control your husband backfired spectacularly? That you and your friends conspired to create illegal recordings for blackmail purposes? Please go ahead." My lawyer would absolutely love the additional ammunition. Her hands were visibly shaking as she grabbed her water glass, gulping the contents rather than sipping like the refined woman she pretended to be. "This is just temporary," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "You're angry right now, but you'll calm down and realize what you're throwing away." "What exactly am I throwing away, Victoria?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "A life of servitude to someone who views me as property? A wife who conspires with her friends to train me like an animal? A marriage where I'm valued only for the size of my paycheck?" I shook my head slowly. "I've spent the last 10 days carefully evaluating exactly what I'd be losing by ending this marriage. The answer is absolutely nothing of value." Victoria's eyes filled with tears right on cue, switching to the waterworks strategy that had worked so effectively in the past. This emotional manipulation had always made me backtrack, apologize, and ultimately concede to whatever she wanted. But not this time. I was completely immune to her performance. "Please," she whispered, reaching across the table for my hand with desperate urgency. "We can start over completely. Forget about the demands entirely. I was just upset about things in our relationship." I calmly withdrew my hand from her reach, maintaining my composure. "There's nothing left to start over, Victoria. You don't want a husband. You want an ATM machine with a pulse. And I refuse to be anyone's walking wallet." The tears vanished instantly, replaced by the cold fury that represented her true nature beneath all the manipulative facades. "You think this is how our story ends?" she said with barely controlled rage. "You have absolutely no idea what I'm capable of doing to you." "Actually, I have a very clear idea," I replied smoothly, "which is exactly why I've been documenting everything for months." This was a strategic lie, but I delivered it with complete confidence. "Including your affair with Brandon." Her face showed genuine shock at this accusation, confirming that I'd hit close to something real. "I haven't been having an affair," she stammered. "Save the denials," I continued relentlessly. Crystal's husband Tyler told me everything last week. It seems your girl squad isn't quite as loyal to each other as you thought they were. This was another calculated lie, but I could see it landed with devastating effect. The truth was that people who conspire to control and manipulate others can never truly trust anyone, including their fellow conspirators. Her friend group was built on a foundation of toxicity that would inevitably collapse. "This is the part where you sign these papers and we never have to see each other again," I said, sliding a pen across the table toward her. "Or we can let the lawyers and court sort everything out while I show the police your blackmail scheme with those recordings. The choice is entirely yours." For a terrifying moment, I genuinely thought Victoria might physically attack me right there in the restaurant. Her face contorted with a level of rage I had never witnessed before, revealing the true person she'd been hiding throughout our entire marriage. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the mask came back on as she attempted to regain some semblance of control. "You're going to regret this decision for the rest of your life," she said, her voice taking on an eerily calm tone that was somehow more disturbing than her anger. "You have absolutely no idea what's coming for you." I actually had a pretty good idea of what she was planning to do next, but I felt completely prepared for whatever retaliation she might attempt. The documentation I'd gathered and the legal groundwork I'd laid would protect me from most of her potential attacks. The backlash began at dawn the very next day, exactly as I'd anticipated. My phone exploded with notifications from Victoria and her entire social circle as the flying monkeys were deployed right on schedule to try to guilt me back into submission. Crystal called first, putting on her best performance of fake concern and manufactured sympathy. "Derek, she's absolutely devastated by what you've done to her," Crystal said, clearly reading from a prepared script. "Whatever you think she did, you're completely overreacting. Men always do this kind of thing." I let her finish her entire rehearsed speech before responding calmly. "That's interesting. Did Victoria happen to mention the written demands for financial control when she told you her version? What about the planned blackmail scheme? Or did she just play the victim role?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then came some pathetic stammering as Crystal realized Victoria hadn't told them the full truth about what had transpired. I ended the call immediately and blocked her number. Next came Victoria's sister Melissa, taking a much more aggressive approach than Crystal had attempted. "You backstabbing piece of—" she began before I cut her off. "Save the dramatics," I interrupted firmly. "Your sister presented me with written demands to control our finances and intimacy, and she planned to record me without consent for blackmail purposes. Would you personally accept that kind of treatment from your husband?" Again, there was stunned silence followed by a hesitant, "She wouldn't actually do something like that." "I have all the documents and screenshots as evidence," I replied matter-of-factly. "Would you like me to send copies to you, to your husband, to your parents, so they can see what their daughter really became?" The call ended abruptly, and I blocked another number. By midday, I had blocked 6 different people who were trying to guilt me into returning to my abusive marriage. I also drafted carefully worded emails to my close friends and family members, explaining my decision in measured, factual terms. I avoided emotional appeals or character assassination, instead providing just the unvarnished truth with offers to provide evidence if anyone needed to see it for themselves. At work, I informed security about the potential for disruptions and provided them with Victoria's photograph. This turned out to be a wise precaution, because she showed up around 2:30 p.m. dressed to impress and with tears perfectly timed for maximum dramatic effect. Security politely but firmly prevented her from reaching my office. "Your wife is here to see you," the receptionist called to inform me of the situation. "Ex-wife in progress," I corrected calmly. "Please tell her that all communication needs to go through my lawyer from now on." Through the glass partitions in our office, I could see Victoria's carefully constructed facade crack when she was denied access to me. The mask slipped dramatically, revealing the fury beneath her fake tears as she switched from sobbing damsel in distress to screaming harpy in the space of just a few seconds. Security escorted her out while she hurled threats and insults. That evening, I returned to my new apartment to find Victoria waiting in the parking lot like some kind of stalker. I had anticipated this move and stayed safely in my truck with the window barely cracked open. "How did you find this place?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I followed you from work," she admitted, as if stalking behavior was perfectly normal and acceptable. "We need to talk without lawyers getting involved." "No, we absolutely do not," I replied firmly. "Everything that needs to be said has already been said." I raised my phone so she could see it clearly. "This conversation is being recorded, and I've already texted building security about your presence here. Leave immediately, or you'll be dealing with a trespassing charge." Victoria's expression hardened into something truly ugly as her final manipulation attempt failed completely. "You think you're so clever, but I made you into who you are," she declared with venomous certainty. "I can break you just as easily as I built you up." "You never made me into anything, Victoria," I replied with calm certainty. "You just temporarily convinced me that I was worth less than I actually am." That mistake has been permanently corrected. As I had predicted, she escalated from vague threats to specific promises about taking everything in the divorce proceedings. When those failed to provoke any reaction from me, she switched tactics to reminiscing about the good times we'd supposedly shared. Finally, she resorted to tearful apologies, claiming that the demands had just been a test of my commitment to our marriage. Building security arrived and escorted her off the property while she screamed that I would regret this decision for the rest of my life. I watched her theatrical performance passively until she was completely gone, then sent the video recording of the entire encounter to my lawyer, Jonathan, as additional evidence of her unstable behavior and continued harassment. Inside my sparse new apartment, I looked around at my minimal belongings and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I could breathe without that constant pressure in my chest. There was no more walking on eggshells around every word I spoke. No more calculating every action to avoid triggering an explosive reaction. Just pure, beautiful peace. The next few months became a calculated war of attrition as Victoria tried every single trick in the manipulation handbook. She claimed to mutual friends that I was abusive, despite having zero evidence to support such accusations. She told anyone who would listen that I had been cheating on her, which was completely false. She accidentally backed into my truck at a stoplight, an incident that was fortunately caught on my dash camera and provided even more evidence of her vindictive behavior. Victoria contacted my boss claiming that I was stealing materials from job sites, which actually made him laugh out loud since he knew my character and work ethic better than that. She showed up at my mother's house crying and begging for support, but my mom told her to leave immediately and never come back. She created fake social media accounts to spread rumors about me online, but these were quickly traced back to her through IP addresses and digital forensics. Each attempt at retaliation was carefully documented and added to my growing legal case against her. Every lie was systematically countered with concrete evidence. Every attack just strengthened my position while weakening hers. My lawyer, Jonathan, was worth every penny I paid him, calmly advising me through each escalation and helping me respond appropriately. The most satisfying moment came when Victoria's own lawyer dropped her as a client after she ignored his professional advice and violated a temporary restraining order by showing up at my workplace for the second time. The look of shock and disbelief on her face when security escorted her out again was absolutely priceless. Meanwhile, I focused entirely on rebuilding my life from the ground up. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. I started working out regularly again and taking care of my physical health. I joined a weekend fishing group that gave me a peaceful hobby to enjoy. I even took a cooking class to learn some new skills. These were all small steps toward reclaiming the life that had been slowly suffocated during our toxic marriage. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, everything changed dramatically when Victoria's support system collapsed in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The girl squad that had seemed so united in their husband training conspiracy imploded completely. And it all started when Madison's husband found their group chat while backing up her phone data. He left her immediately after discovering the extent of their manipulation schemes, taking screenshots of everything as evidence for his own divorce proceedings. Within just a few days, Brittany's boyfriend and Crystal's husband had also seen the damning evidence of their partner's involvement in the conspiracy. Suddenly, Victoria's entire support network crumbled as each woman found herself dealing with her own relationship disaster. The women quickly turned on each other like the toxic individuals they truly were, with each one blaming the others for the husband training scheme that had destroyed their relationships. Without their mutual validation and encouragement, Victoria's confidence completely crumbled along with her elaborate plans. The desperate text messages started coming daily after her support system disappeared. "Can we please just talk? I didn't mean those horrible things I said," read one message. "The girls put me up to it. It wasn't really my idea," claimed another. "I need help with the mortgage payments," begged a third. I didn't respond to any of these messages, following my lawyer's advice perfectly and forwarding every single communication to Jonathan to build our case even stronger. Then came the harsh financial reality that Victoria had never bothered to understand or prepare for. Throughout our entire marriage, she had never taken the time to learn how our bills actually got paid or what it cost to maintain our lifestyle. without my income supporting her. Even the credit card minimum payments alone were crushing her financially. Her part-time job at a boutique paid barely enough to cover groceries, let alone the mortgage, utilities, and all the other expenses she'd taken for granted. 5 months into the divorce process, I received a text message that almost made me laugh out loud with the sheer irony of it. The water heater broke and the plumber wants $200 to replace it. Can you help me, please? This desperate plea came from the same woman who had demanded complete control over my entire paycheck, who had spent thousands of dollars on designer clothes while complaining that we couldn't afford to visit my dying mother in the hospital, and who had tried to put me on a $300 monthly allowance of my own hard-earned money. I didn't respond to her request, but I definitely smiled when I read it. The woman who had tried to make me financially dependent on her approval was now discovering what real financial vulnerability actually felt like. 6 months to the day after Victoria had placed that manila envelope on our kitchen table, we met in court for the final divorce hearing. The evidence I had accumulated was absolutely overwhelming and painted a clear picture of sustained emotional abuse and attempted coercion. The written demands, the group chat screenshots discussing blackmail strategies, witness statements from colleagues who had observed her meltdown at my office, the threatening messages, and the documented stalking incident were all methodically presented by Jonathan in a devastating case that left no room for doubt about what had really happened in our marriage. Victoria's attempts to mount a counter-defense had backfired spectacularly in every possible way. The Girl Squad members refused to testify on her behalf, as each of them was now dealing with their own divorce disasters and legal problems. The false accusations she had threatened to make against me never materialized, especially after Jonathan warned her legal team that any such claims would face rigorous scrutiny, given the well-established pattern of manipulation and dishonesty we had documented. The most devastating moment came when the judge reviewed the 12 written demands during the hearing. His exact words were, "This constitutes a disturbing pattern of psychological abuse and attempted financial coercion." Hearing those words from a family court judge caused Victoria to visibly crumble in her seat. Finally understanding that her manipulation tactics wouldn't work in a legal setting where evidence and facts mattered more than tears and emotional manipulation. The judge's ruling was decisive and comprehensive. The house would be sold with proceeds split according to original financial contributions, which meant I would get back my entire $78,000 down payment before any remaining equity was divided. My retirement accounts were protected from her claims. Most importantly, there would be no alimony payments due to the short duration of our marriage and her demonstrated ability to work and support herself. As we exited the courtroom, Victoria's lawyer strongly advised her against approaching me, but she ignored his professional counsel and intercepted me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Are you happy now?" she demanded, her voice quivering with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You've completely destroyed everything we built together." I looked directly at her, feeling nothing but distant pity for someone who had become so consumed with the need to control others that she'd lost sight of basic human decency. "No, Victoria. You destroyed everything," I replied calmly. "The moment you decided that I was something to be owned rather than someone to be respected." "I loved you," she insisted, the crocodile tears starting again in a performance that no longer had any effect on me whatsoever. "No, you loved controlling me." "There's a significant difference between those two things," I responded, as I stepped around her to continue walking toward the exit. "You'll regret this decision," she called after me desperately. "You'll never find anyone who cares for you the way I did." I turned back briefly to deliver my final words to her. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. 1 year after what I now refer to as Liberation Day, my life had transformed completely and beyond recognition. Brightline Construction promoted me to Senior Project Manager with a substantial $26,000 annual raise in recognition of my improved focus and performance. I had moved from the temporary apartment to a small house near the bay, with a 2-car garage that had plenty of room for the 1969 Camaro I was now restoring as a tribute to my father's memory. I had successfully reconnected with friends and family members who I'd lost touch with during the isolating years of my marriage. I started fishing again on weekends, which brought me tremendous peace and satisfaction. I even began dating casually, nothing serious yet, but simply enjoying the freedom to be myself without constant criticism, manipulation, or having to walk on eggshells around every word I spoke. Then came an unexpected text message that would change my understanding of the situation even further. "Derek, it's Madison. Please don't block me," the message read. "There's something important you should know about what's been happening." Curious about what she might have to tell me, I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location. When Madison arrived, she looked completely different from the predatory, confident woman I remembered from the few times we had met during my marriage. She appeared humbler, less aggressive, and seemed to have lost that calculating gleam in her eyes that had always made me uncomfortable. "I owe you a sincere apology," she said immediately upon sitting down. "What we did with those demands and the whole husband training group was completely toxic and wrong. I'm genuinely ashamed that I participated in something so manipulative and cruel." Madison went on to explain how their toxic friend group had imploded in spectacular fashion after the truth came out. Crystal's husband, Tyler, had filed for divorce and actually received full custody of their children after showing the family court their training discussions and manipulation tactics. Brittany's boyfriend had left her for her younger sister in a move that had created massive family drama. Victoria, meanwhile, was working 3 different jobs just trying to cover the enormous debts she had accumulated during our marriage. "The thing is," Madison continued with obvious discomfort, "Victoria's been telling everyone who will listen that you abused her emotionally and financially. She's claiming that those demands were her desperate attempt to regain some control in an abusive relationship. She's playing the victim role to anyone who will listen to her story." I wasn't particularly surprised by this revelation, as it fit perfectly with Victoria's established pattern of manipulation and dishonesty. "And do people actually believe her version of events?" I asked. "Some people did believe her initially, until something happened last week that changed everything." Madison pulled out her phone and showed me a video that had been taken at a local restaurant. In the video, Victoria was clearly upset and bragging to some random guy she was apparently trying to impress. "I almost had him trained perfectly," she could be heard saying. "Another month or 2 and I would have controlled every single penny he earned. Men are so fucking stupid, it's almost too easy." "She doesn't know that Crystal's cousin was at the next table and recorded this entire conversation," Madison explained. "The video has been making the rounds through our social circle and it's pretty much destroyed any credibility she had left." Madison then slid an envelope across the table toward me. "Victoria's been trying to recruit new women to her training program, targeting women in our wider social circle. These are copies of text messages she sent, trying to get them interested in her methods. I thought you should have them for your own protection in case she tries anything else." I thanked Madison for the warning and the evidence, but I explained that I had completely moved on from that chapter of my life. Victoria couldn't hurt me anymore because I had built strong boundaries and legal protections around myself. As I drove home from the coffee meeting, I felt a strange sense of closure about the entire situation. The woman who had tried so desperately to break me and control every aspect of my life was now the one who was completely broken. 2 weeks later, the situation got even more satisfying in a way I never could have anticipated. I received an unexpected email from Victoria's current boss at her workplace. Apparently, she had listed me as a character reference for a promotion she was seeking, presumably assuming that I would never actually be contacted about it. "Mr. Davidson, I'm hoping to discuss Victoria's application for the assistant manager position," the email read. "She's listed you as a character reference, and I'd appreciate any insights you might have about her work ethic and character." I replied to the inquiry truthfully and professionally. "I'm actually her ex-husband, so I'm quite surprised to be listed as a reference for her application. I would suggest checking her previous employment history very carefully, as there were significant issues with honesty and integrity during our relationship." The response wasn't vindictive or unnecessarily harsh, just enough of a warning for any reasonable employer to conduct proper due diligence before promoting someone with questionable character. About a month later, Madison sent me another text message with an update I found grimly satisfying. "Victoria got fired yesterday. Apparently, they discovered she was stealing money from the register." I didn't bother responding to Madison's message, but I wasn't surprised by this development either. Someone willing to manipulate and financially abuse their own spouse would certainly be capable of stealing from their employer. The final chapter of this saga came about 6 weeks later when I was finishing up work at a construction site. I received a call from an unknown number, and against my better judgment, I decided to answer it. "Derek, it's Victoria. Please don't hang up on me," came the voice that I barely recognized. She sounded completely different from the confident, controlling woman I had been married to. Her voice was defeated, hollow, and desperate in a way that was almost shocking to hear. "What do you want?" I asked in a flat, emotionless tone. "I need help," she said, her voice already starting to crack with emotion. "I'm about to be evicted from my apartment. All the credit cards are completely maxed out. I can't find a decent job anywhere. My parents won't talk to me anymore. All the girls have abandoned me completely. I literally have nowhere else to turn." That sounds like a very difficult situation, I replied neutrally, offering no emotional support or validation. Could I possibly borrow some money just until I get back on my feet? She asked with obvious desperation. I swear on everything that I'll pay you back as soon as I'm able to. I closed my eyes and remembered the manila envelope that had started this entire ordeal. I thought about the 12 demands, the attempted blackmail scheme, the stalking incidents, and all the lies she had spread about me. I remembered her words caught on video. Men are so fucking stupid. No, I said simply and definitively. I cannot and will not help you financially. Please, she begged, now openly crying into the phone. I know I was wrong about everything. I know I treated you terribly and I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. I've learned my lesson, I promise. For just a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her pathetic situation. Then I remembered her casual cruelty and her absolute certainty that she could control and manipulate me indefinitely. Victoria, I said in a calm, measured voice, I suggest you contact a women's shelter or social services. They have resources specifically designed to help people in your situation. You're really not going to help me after 8 years of marriage? She asked in disbelief. Think of it as demand number 13, I replied with a slight smile in my voice. Complete financial independence from me? Non-negotiable. I ended the call immediately and blocked the number permanently. That evening, as I worked on restoring my Camaro's engine in my garage, I reflected on how completely our roles had reversed from where they'd been just 2 years earlier. The woman who had tried to control every single aspect of my life now had absolutely no control over even the most basic elements of her own existence. The demands that were meant to be my prison sentence had instead become her own personal hell. Sometimes karma doesn't need your active participation or intervention. It just needs you to step aside and let it work its natural course through the consequences of people's own actions. I've been completely free from that toxic relationship for almost 2 years now, and the transformation in my life has been remarkable. The house sold for a nice profit that allowed me to establish a solid financial foundation for my future. My job continues to go extremely well, with additional promotions and recognition for my improved performance and focus. I've even started seeing someone new, who treats partnership as genuine collaboration rather than an opportunity for domination and control. The contrast between healthy and toxic relationships couldn't be more stark. Respect versus control, support versus manipulation, love versus possession. When people ask me what happened to my marriage, I keep my response direct but brief. She made demands that crossed lines no self-respecting person would ever accept, I tell them. That explanation is usually sufficient for most people. Those who have experienced similar dynamics in their own relationships understand immediately what I mean. Those who haven't experienced such manipulation don't need to hear all the disturbing details. The manila envelope that was originally meant to formalize my submission to her will instead crystallize my liberation from an abusive situation. Each unreasonable demand she made became another compelling reason to break free from her control. The compliant, walking on eggshells man who received that envelope doesn't exist anymore. He's been completely replaced by someone who recognizes manipulation tactics instantly, values his own worth inherently, and moves through life entirely on his own terms. And that transformation represents the real victory in this entire ordeal. Edit. Since many people in the comments have asked about what happened to the rest of the girl squad after everything fell apart, I don't keep close tabs on them anymore. But I do hear occasional updates through mutual acquaintances in our social circle. Crystal's husband Tyler successfully obtained full custody of their children after the family court reviewed the training texts and manipulation schemes. Crystal is currently fighting for basic visitation rights and working at a big box retail store to support herself. Brittany's boyfriend discovered that she was constantly trash-talking him to the group while simultaneously spending his money on personal luxuries. He left her for her younger sister, which created massive family drama. From what I've heard, he and the sister are now engaged. Madison actually seemed genuinely remorseful about her participation in the manipulation scheme. She sought professional therapy, reconciled with her husband, and they're currently in marriage counseling trying to rebuild their relationship. She's the only member of the group who actually apologized for her behavior. Victoria ended up in the worst situation by far. She's working multiple low-paying jobs, living in a terrible apartment, and has no friends left from her former social circle. Her parents finally cut her off financially after discovering that she had been lying to them about me being abusive throughout our marriage. She still attempts to contact me through new phone numbers about every 3 to 4 months, usually when she's particularly desperate for money. But I immediately block each new number as soon as I realize it's her.